Donna, what was that thing that Richard told us specifically not to talk about today? Was it politics?
Yeah, look, Richard Clippen definitely told us not to speak about politics.
It's really hard to introduce this next session without talking about politics. Do you think maybe, though, we could mention that?
No, we definitely can't talk about that. That's way too controversial. But hey, what if we just mention the...
Yeah, we probably can't talk about that either. Probably wouldn't go down too well. But, you know who is allowed to talk about politics today? Our political pundits.
Yeah, so how about we let them do their thing? This is one of the most popular sessions of the FSC Conference and always promises to be a lively and thought-provoking debate in which journalists and industry leaders debate the key issues in the sector from their perspectives, in a session named Aotearoa, Where To From Here. Please welcome to the stage our political pundits, Kirk Hope, CEO of Business NZ, Trish Sherson, partner at Sherson Willis, Liam Dann, business journalist, NZ Herald business editor at large, Richard Clippen, CEO of the FSC, and facilitator Rachel Smalley.
Oh, well, you guys have got yourself all confused, haven't you? All in the wrong
Sure if I
places,
need it
but
or
that's
not.
okay. Richard Clippen won't be joining us, but because we didn't have enough room on the sofa, but I think we've got enough of our crew here. As you heard, Kirk Hope and Liam Dann and Trish Sherson. Welcome to you all. I'm going to start with you, I think, Trish, because let's get an overview, I guess, of the state of the nation, and I think how we approach some of the issues and the big issues that we're facing today really comes down to who's going to be in government in the next 12 months. And what do you think the polls are telling us at the moment?
I think the polls are telling us right now that if you are a tactical and poll-driven government in the absence of strategy, it will be very difficult to win a third term. Don't underestimate at all the enormous amount of work that the National Party has to do to become a credible government after 2023 if they win the election. I saw a column recently by Matthew Hooton, and he posed the question, is this the most inept government since Muldoon? Which was great clickbait for Liam and his mates at the Herald. But in fact, I think that the enormous structural issues with the main social contracts the government has with New Zealand, i.e. keeping us safe, keeping us healthy, looking after us if we fall on hard times. Those contracts are currently very broken, and so that's why I say for National and ACT, if they are a coalition government, man, there's a lot of heavy lifting to do, and that's not even touching on the economy.
Gosh, okay. Kirk, you have, in your capacity with Business New Zealand, you have quite a bit of engagement with the governments of the day at the moment. Do you get the feeling that there is a strong strategic direction from Labour, and whether we will see that perhaps potentially developed more as we head into the election?
Well, my observation, I might just use a quote from Trish Sherson that she used on a political panel earlier this week. It describes quite well, I think, some of my perspectives about government. That is, they're trying to beat an egg into a pavlova. And if you think about that, what do I mean by that? They came in without much of a plan. It was, they had a lot of, I think, challenges in terms of the lead up to the 2017 election. And that's really, I think, hampered any real sense of progress that they're able to make. And I think, the complications of coalition were no more exposed than in the government between 2017 and 2020. So what do they need to do? They have actually done quite a lot of work in terms of industry transformation plans and so on, but a lot of their programs have relied heavily on ideology. And the problem with that is, after a while, it gets exposed. As you get deeper and deeper into detail, real policy detail, it gets exposed. So they will need more than just a strategy to lead into the election next year. They'll need to have a really, really compelling vision about New Zealand, which frankly I think they've struggled to probably execute. They may well have articulated some of it, but they've struggled to execute it over the last 5 years. And you know, conversely, National also will have to come to the election not just with a vision, but with an execution plan and strategy to be able to do that really, really quickly. Because as Trish points out, you know, and I think everyone in this room would understand, we face some pretty significant challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Liam, do you think National and ACT, they're a serious contender in their current form as a coalition? Are they a serious contender for government?
Am I using this one? Absolutely, yeah. It is, you know, we look at the polls, but I mean, for me, it's the economy, it's that Bill Clinton's advisor, the quote, you know, it's the economy, stupid. There are a lot of good things about the economy. We've retained jobs and a lot of the stuff I just talked to Christian about, but people really don't like inflation. Most people haven't really experienced it. It's making them feel poorer. And so that is definitely making people feel quite grumpy right now. People look forward, not back. So there's not a heck of a lot of sympathy anywhere in the world for incumbent governments for what we've been through with the pandemic. They're looking at now and the immediate future, and it looks like going backwards for a while. The risk, I think, for National and ACT is thinking that they can sort of keep their head down and let the grumpiness do the job, because we are kind of, as much as the opposition and people will say, oh, there are plenty of domestic issues, but New Zealand is at sea in a sort of turbulent world, and whether the economy at a macro level starts to come right before the election or after the election probably isn't in our hands. It's probably to do with the US and China and all those things. So if I was National, to the point Kirk made, I would be definitely focusing on presenting some real vision and an execution strategy and something to hang on to, not just hoping that the Labour government's so down and out that they'll romp in.
Trish, do you think the government is chasing a third term, or should I say, do you think Jacinda Ardern is chasing a third term, or is she over in New York at the moment pressing a bit of flesh, perhaps looking for the next job, do you think?
Well, who knows? You know, you would have to calculate for Labour that if Jacinda Ardern wasn't going to stand again, now would be the time to indicate that. I think that would be catastrophic for Labour. If you look beyond the Prime Minister, there hasn't been anyone in the last 6 years who you could see as a great retail PM in waiting on the hustings. There's talk about Grant Robertson in that role, but again, I'm not sure in a retail sense that would be a winner. I'm sure Labour are wanting a third term. They've got a huge legislative program on with major reforms like Three Waters that they will struggle to get through before Parliament rises for the election. So there will be a lot of unfinished business for them. And I guess that's one of the problems that they have going into that election campaign. You know, I think that writing their manifesto for this election will be one of the most difficult in history. You know, you'd look at the page of achievements and there would be a lot of blanks on there. And then you would look at the forward-looking policies based on the achievements, and you'd go, well, again, a lot of white space on the page.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a very tricky one for Labour, and not least of which they face a very unusual situation in the current Prime Minister, where she had to front COVID. In the early days, did a phenomenal job as a communicator. But as the time went on and the impact was felt very, very deeply by people in their own lives, businesses closing, falling over, etc., there became a sort of phenomena around those 1 p.m. press conferences, which was a stress reaction from people. And that still carries over for a lot of people now when they see and hear from the Prime Minister. And I'm not sure that there has been that phenomena in New Zealand politics before, where, you know, the leader of a party is trying to get beyond what is actually a very visceral response from voters.
I want to stay with you on that for a moment, because in the last 48 hours, Grant Robertson has come out and said that this election may have to change a little and that you may not see us so much out and about doing our walkabouts and in the regions. And if you see recently how that's played out, it's been pretty hostile towards a lot of ministers and the Prime Minister in particular. If that plays out, I would think that would favour the Labour government if they have to talk about spending less time out and about in the walkabouts, because it's not going to favour a Labour government, I would have thought, if you're seeing uprisings on the news and people getting really stroppy with ministers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit cynical about the groundwork that has been laid by Robertson this week around, you know, we're not going to be out with voters pre-election because of safety concerns. There is no doubt that we are in a grumpy phase with the electorate. There are some very unhelpful fringe elements, and we've seen how they've behaved, you know, through the vaccine mandates, etc. But in a democracy like New Zealand's, I do not think it's credible during an election campaign that you will not be out and about. I note immediately Luxon and David Seymour saying, yes, absolutely, we'll be doing that. And I wonder if it's more of a political calculation that Jacinda mania is over. If she's out doing the walkabouts in the malls, the 6 o'clock news pictures, which are really what a campaign lives or dies by, are going to be totally different this time round. There may be hecklers, there may be protesters, there may only be 5 people turning up. And so that's where my cynicism comes from, that it's less about real security concerns and it's more about the TV pictures.
When you think about where you used to see ministers and prime ministers, it was very much in our health system, out and about, shaking hands in and around wards. When was the last time we saw anybody from government anywhere near a hospital at the moment? And I don't know whether we will heading into the election. Kirk, I want to talk to you a little bit about leadership in general, because if you look at some of our past leaders, so, you know, Bolger, Longy, Clark and Key, and those who were, you know, close but didn't make it, Sir Bill English, the likes of Sir Don McKinnon. When you look at the leadership now within politics, what do you make of it? And I'm talking about, you know, look at Auckland, for example, at the moment, Efesu Collins, Wayne Brown as well. The arc of leadership in New Zealand, where are we positioned with that in comparison to years gone by?
Well, what a great question.
It's a bit long.
Look, it's quite interesting when you observe, there's some great analysis out on the Leadership Capital Index, and it covers a whole bunch of leaders, not just New Zealand ones. But if you look at that arc for Clark and for Key, they were elevated for a lot longer period in terms of their general popularity and being able to carry their personal vote for a long period of time. What you've seen with Ardern is a little different. It's much more peaky, and the peak is around the crises management, and you're seeing that back off a bit now. So what that tells you is that the current government, and in particular, Jacinda Ardern, is very much attached to being able to solve short-term problems for New Zealand, and seen as, really talismanic. That's the wrong talispersonanic. In terms of being able to, take a set of communities through big issues. Now, whether that's going to hold, if people, for example, can't pay for petrol, they can't pay for food, and they can't pay for the roof over their head because interest rates have gone up, that will certainly hurt the government. Could Jacinda Ardern and Labour come back from it? Well, Helen Clark did, and I think it was the 2005 election. There was a big issue. She dropped down, her personal polling dropped quite low, but she managed to form a government, and that's, I guess, the complication that we have around MMP. Even if a political leader isn't at the peak of their powers, as long as they can work with other political parties, and therein lies a what I think is quite still and will remain a really significant challenge on the right of politics. So I think that's one to watch. With local body elections, I think, my frustration would be that, there isn't a great deal of party infrastructure around local body politics. And so it becomes highly disaggregated. And you get a range of individuals, and their ability to be able to connect with the community is almost directly attached to their ability to pay for their campaign, right? And so what we need to see, I think, is a lot more professionalism in local body politics. But also, I think the business community has got a big role to play, and we try and urge people to get involved all the time. They say, sorry, I'm too busy, I haven't got the time. But it's a really important step for, I think, business people to be involved in local body politics, because the decision-making in the absence of that can be pretty erratic.
Liam, what do you make of the positioning of Nicola Willis as Deputy Leader? She's spokesperson for finance. We heard her speak this morning. She's super sharp. She knows her eggs for sure. When you look at past partnerships and you look at, say, Key and you look at English, both could always talk really eloquently to the economy. Luxon and Willis definitely can, I think, as well. Ardern in this environment, I think most of us would agree, struggles to speak strongly to the economy. Is that going to be a challenge for her heading into this election when the economy is so front and centre?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are a good duo, Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis. Again, speaking to the leadership thing, the depth of both parties maybe isn't as great as we'd like, but at the top there, they are strong. And I think they're good at grabbing onto an issue and elevating it, an economic issue. So like we had the KiwiSaver tax issue, which, cynics, certainly on the left, would say that the national government, previous national government, cut some of the benefits of KiwiSaver and sort of got away with it, but the opposition was very good at elevating that and getting behind the public understanding of what it was going to mean, and so that sort of loose ball tactic of jumping on something and elevating it, I think both Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis are very good at. I still, back to that other point, I still think they need to, and they say they are formulating policy and so forth, but they need to present a bigger vision as well, because although I guess Jacinda Ardern's problem is she's sort of been overexposed. People say, it's almost like they're in a third term, even though we've only had two. There's that third term malaise because of the extent of exposure through COVID and things. They are very shrewd politicians, both Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson. I laugh sometimes. People sort of say, they've got no real life experience. Well, no, they've been politicians since they were 18, so that they are very good at the actual political games.
I think that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. It's you'd expect her to sort of, I think they'll keep her out of the limelight a bit, apart from these big international things, and then you kind of. You bring her back next year, it's sort of bring her back like Elvis in '68, and and that will be a strong, a strong force to reckon with.
I think when you, one of the upsides, Trish, of being in opposition is that you get to come up with all those clever little lines, and I think off the back of the cost of living payment, I think it was Nicola Willis who came up with the old spray and walk away line, and she's rolled that out whenever she can. When you look at the handbrake that Labor had to apply, there was burning rubber on the road from the GST turnaround that Liam was talking about there. It was a pretty remarkable stop, I think, for them. And I think Business Desk came up with that great headline about David Parker. It just said David from accounts, and he'd made a bit of a faux pas. When you look at, though, the application of GST onto KiwiSaver fees, it makes sense. It's a service that's provided. We should be paying GST on it. This government's been pretty good at communicating. Was this really just a breakdown, a communications crisis, more so than anything particularly wrong with applying GST to the fees of GST? KiwiSaver.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to form any other view than it was an attempt to sneak this through, because you have an omnibus tax bill and, won't come as a surprise to anyone here that I haven't looked through it. but the minister put out a press release, absolutely zero mention of this at all. And that's really where the rubber started burning on the road. I think it just, you put the issue itself aside and you go, it was a political miscalculation from the government. Normally, when these types of big changes are made, there would be a warm-up period first. The idea would be floated, everybody has the opportunity to sort of let off steam about it, and then, hey presto, it gets rolled through. That process was totally missed. I think it was very unfortunate that it was David Parker, because he is seen as a technocrat. I mean, when he had to do the stand-up on the tiles of Parliament about this, it was almost worse than him having teeth pulled. That such was his, I think, both probably frustration and anger. That was also reflected in the release that he put out, saying we've done the U-turn, where, I think 8 out of 9 paragraphs were about why this was a great idea, and the final paragraph was, well, hey, we had to pull it. I think it might have been, again, for this government, the right idea, but at the wrong time and put up in the wrong way.
Kirk, you've been involved in the framework and the design of the New Zealand Income Insurance Scheme. Are you confident this government can communicate it?
Well, I think there's probably still quite a long way to go. I mean, that would be my first observation. My other observation about that, just quickly, just to defer on NZIIS, well, I can, breakdown on that GST stuff. It's clearly a breakdown from David in accounts and Jacinda in marketing, right? I think, just to go back to NZIIS, so the context was pre-COVID, and we started to look at this with the government, right? And ironically, then a crisis comes along. And the context of the discussion was, what do you do to support people's income in a crisis? So you can borrow money to do it, and then you can tax people more to pay back that money, or you can prepay it in advance. And so those are the three ways. And clearly, NZIIS is about looking how to address some of those future crisis issues in ways that enable people to continue to participate in the economy. And if you think about the role that the fiscal policy of government over the pandemic has been to keep people attached to their jobs, keep the economy going, and keep money going through it. Now so you can use a bunch of different policy tools. In the absence of a massive pandemic, our last experience of that was the GFC. And again, actually, some New Zealanders got through the GFC pretty badly, to be honest, because there wasn't the level of support that was needed to continue to pay the mortgage while you could look for the next job or while you could get the next job. So that's a bit of context around it. Look, it's certainly, it was good to hear the submissions from a lot of businesses and get the feedback. Our role in it was to try and work with the CTU and the government to design something that people could then respond to. And, you've seen that in other policy realms with, for example, highly successful capital gains tax design. Is it better to be at the table, though, right, from Business New Zealand? Better to be at the table and involved than having something delivered to you? Yeah, no, exactly right. And actually to reflect some business perspectives into the design of that process as well is really, really critical for us. Even if what we might have proposed wasn't agreed with 70 or 80% of the time. So, but it's better for an organisation like ours to be involved and be representing business. I mean, one observation that I make is that there still needs to be a significant amount of consultation with a lot of really, really key stakeholders, and we've made that pretty clear to the government. I've got a text in here, I'll put it to you, Kirk. Given the examples you've just discussed, KiwiSaver and NZIIS, does the government really listen, do you think, to what the financial services industry has to say? Well, I think the GST is a really good example of where they do. They do. And I think one of the points that I've made around the governance group table is that it would be useful for the people involved in NZIIS design to go back and do much deeper consultation, particularly with the industry that's going to be delivering it in some way, shape or form or affected by it quite significantly. And that would be an important feature of making something that has longevity and is long-lasting. If you don't do that, you're going to get what you've got in the political arena at the moment, which is people saying, well, National saying, no, we'd get rid of it tomorrow.
Yeah, it's interesting because Grant Robertson said yesterday, Trish, that if it was to come in, it wouldn't come in until 2024, neatly placed after an election. Do you think it could become an election issue, given that sort of numbers they're bandying around? Nicola Willis said they'd run the numbers for the average income. It would cost you as an employee about $834 a year. That's a lot of dosh. Again, is Labour's timing a bit off with this?
I agree. I mean, Kirk's got a great point in his role about, you need to be at the table with these things rather than just being served up a fait accompli that's even more difficult. This to me looks like another example of a solution trying to find a problem. The number of redundancies these days in New Zealand is tiny, and I saw actually the comment, I think it was in the submission from Countdown Supermarket, they employ some 20,000 people, and I think they said in the last year there were perhaps 400 involuntary redundancies, to give you an idea of the numbers. And so I don't think either the focus of this is right, I don't think the structure of it is right, and I think it's come at the wrong time for business, and at the time where there is a feeling with the government that rather than coming to campaign for your third term and leaning more into political pragmatism as a way to help you get those votes, they have become more and more entrenched in ideology and pushing through a number of these big reforms that there just isn't the support for.
Nicola Willis said earlier this morning that there would be a number of people in this room who would offer income support, and she said, don't kid yourself that the government will engage with you in providing, getting you alongside. That said, Liam, are we something of an outlier, New Zealand, without having some sort of public income insurance scheme?
Well, I'm relying a little bit on what the government's been saying that we are, that there are schemes around the world, obviously, and I'm sure Kirk knows that. Again, I think it's a little bit of a timing thing, the government seems to be going into the next election cycle with a bunch of policies that probably looked really good in 2019, and we'd kind of, we were battling deflation and things were very stable, and there was opportunity for change. I think ideologically you probably are always going to get, you vote in a Labour government, it's going to be more ideological. And so they're up against it a bit, and I imagine the battles are fairly intense internally between the pragmatists and the ideologues, because I think, when we see, and Kirk would get this, Grant Robertson coming out to business meetings and some of the others, David Parker and so on, and they're quite, they appear to be listening, they appear to understand, then they appear to go back to Cabinet and caucus, and things just don't move. The case in point, the one I've been following is, the immigration, and, they've heard nothing but desperation from business around getting skills into this country for obviously the pandemic, but pre-pandemic. And they've kind of carved out some pragmatic solutions, but they're holding on to a big ideological idea, and they're sort of caught, and business is certainly caught in the middle of that.
It's interesting when you talk about engaging with various sectors, and it's the same as what I say to my 13-year-old son, there's listening and there's listening, are you listening? And I think sometimes that's the case. Kirk, if you look at this word ideology, which I think is going to prop up more and more, I was at a conference down in Nelson, actually, and Damien O'Connor was there, the agricultural minister, and one person in the crowd referenced ideology, and I swear he grew 3 foot. They're pretty prickly about this particular term. But when you look at some of what they're talking to, particularly the high-wage economy, Kirk, they are really pushing for this, and we're seeing them what levers they're using to get there. That feels, again, potentially like it's going down the ideological route, particularly when you look at the timing of restricting immigration in order to achieve this?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with the way that some policy is being conducted is that it ends up with an almost contradictory result. So if you think about the consequences of what Liam was just talking about in terms of immigration, obviously we've had an artificial piece of immigration policy called the pandemic, which has meant that borders have been shut, right? No one's been coming in and out that much. But what you were looking at, I think Andrew Little might have gone on into the 2017 election when he was leader, saying, net we'd allow 10,000 people in. Now, what's going to happen with that? In any normal economy, is people are just going to burn out, and we're actually seeing quite a bit of that within the workforce in New Zealand at the moment. So yes, you might be paid more, but inflation is high, and you're feeling more tired, and you really don't want to go to work. So that's a contradictory outcome. I think what you've seen with the very kind of ideological ban on oil and gas production in New Zealand has meant, alongside a commitment to 100% electrification, in all circumstances, those might be good things, but unfortunately, in the absence of a strategy, an overarching energy strategy, they're two components which I think will struggle with contradictory outcomes until we actually do have a proper energy strategy.
Yeah, Trish, yesterday Grant Robertson spoke about that we're in the midst of an immigration rebalance, and those sort of words struck with me about, is it a rebalance, is it an imbalance, or what is behind the need for a rebalance? Can you shed any light on where Labour's positioning or make sense of what they're trying to do with immigration?
Well, I think, Liam made the great point. This was the thinking in 2019 when everything was very different, and it was a time where New Zealand was going to become high value, and that meant, we weren't going to have sort of low-skilled immigration. The times have absolutely changed, and I don't think it's an overstatement to talk about how critical and crippling this is. The big piece of the puzzle that the government is actually missing in the whole domestic inflation debate, and this is really stretching my fifth form economics, but you are strangling immigration at a time where, every able-bodied person in New Zealand, when we've got 3% unemployment, is in work. You can't squeeze that lemon any harder. We have to get more people in, and that reluctance from the government is one of the big reasons also that domestic inflation is pushing up. So, what that comes back to again is this, we've sort of ended up being run as a country by headlines and sound bites. Things that sound great in a headline, but when you look at the actual delivery, it's really not working for the economy. And I saw a great example of this recently. There was recently a conference in the South Island, and it was for New Zealand's space industry. Huge press release came out, took 3 ministers to put all their comments in this press release, so important was it. And it was an announcement actually of, I think, a quantum of $9 million to boost New Zealand's space industry, and I'm thinking, gee, $9 million, it wouldn't even put the brand on the rocket, let alone do anything else. And so I thought I'd better have a look at what this money's going on, and $3 million of it was actually to go towards regulating the sector. And that to me really summed up just how off currently the government's thinking is between what actually drives business and what doesn't, and where money should be spent and where it shouldn't.
Another area, speaking of money spent, another area where, Jacinda Ardern has said climate change, it's our nuclear-free moment. They have subsidised EVs coming in at the expense of utes. My brother's a farmer, I hear about this all the time. Real frustrations for some areas of the sector, but, it is bringing about change. But Liam, at the same time, and I understand the cost of living crisis, but we're subsidising petrol as well. Now, Grant Robertson said we'd probably ease that back from about January. Yesterday he said in here. Is that a mixed message, or am I being unfair to suggest that?
No, it's a conflict. It's a conflict ideologically. Personally, like I follow oil prices every day. I'm watching them going, and you're thinking we're all hoping oil prices come down because that'll ease inflation. And then in the back of your mind, you're thinking, hang on, maybe it's not such a good thing because. And this actually goes to the ideology around immigration and things. It's not just sort of theories out of a university. There is some research here. So you put the acid on things. So economically, high oil prices will change behaviour, and we'll see a faster shift to EVs and all that sort of stuff, which is positive. And again, the immigration, the theory was that you squeeze the labour supply, and because there'd been cheap labour in New Zealand, businesses, say, pick on horticulture for a minute, the study had been done that we don't have the amazing picking technology machines that they have in Germany, and the employers will have to invest in those. But again, climate change is maybe a bigger issue, but there is that timing factor. I mean, it's just right now when you're at capacity, when you're competing with every nation in the world, it's do you pause for a minute, get things back on an even keel, and then relook at it?
Trish, I'm going to give you this one because I think you'll probably quite enjoy it. It's from Jeff. He says, would you care to pass comment on the cost of living payment? Would you care to pass comment on the cost of living payment?
Well, I thought you might as well have dug a hole and just chucked $1 billion down it, to be honest. But there was a great line in The Economist which I thought summed up the cost of living payment and the kind of on-the-hoof policy that we're seeing. And it was that governments around the world, because of the pandemic, have reverted to improvised chaos. And to me, the cost of living payment was a great example of that. It was, at its heart, really a political sop. It was far too wide, it was ill-conceived, it was utterly wasteful. Heading into the next election, I think as voters we all have a responsibility to be very wary of aspirations and very wary of promises now to have quick fixes around what are fundamentally very big issues.
Kirk, I had a message that came through as well saying the insurance scheme, is this perhaps bedding in ahead of the potential for long COVID, the income insurance scheme? Could that be supportive of that?
Look, that's a great question. Who knows what's going to happen with long COVID? I mean, the insurance scheme, I think, has been outlined by the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, has got a wee way to run before they get it in. And clearly, if the Nats get in, they're going to can it. So the process. Look, the answer is, in short, long answer. It probably could be something that could be used for a thing like long COVID, but if you go back to our initial sort of thinking around it was it's a redundancy payment, it's not a health and disability payment. That doubles the cost of the scheme, adding health and disability in, and there may be other better mechanisms that you've got to be able to deal with those issues.
Yeah. I want to talk quickly, there's a couple of other issues that have popped up, not least geopolitics. John Key said we need to really manage, Liam, that relationship with China. In the South Pacific, they're up there side on side or shoulder to shoulder with Russia. Are we doing a good job of that, do you think?
I think that's an area where the government hasn't done a bad job. I mean, it's very, very difficult, and we're all hoping it doesn't escalate further. I think clearly we all see that as a nation we're probably too reliant on China, given what can happen in the world with geopolitical stuff. But it's not an easy thing, and I always, it's after all these years of promoting it, governments themselves don't trade. It's businesses trading, so it's about encouraging businesses to explore other markets and things like that. Sir John Key is still a big fan of the China relationship. I definitely see that. But he is from, and so is Helen Clark. They're from that era where they forged that relationship in New Zealand. I think the world has changed, and I don't think we've done too bad a job. We're sort of having to walk a tightrope with the US there.
Trish, if you were strategising for national or for ACT, or collectively perhaps them both, how bold do they have to be heading into the next election, do you think?
I think boldness is the key word, and it's not just for, a political win, but actually New Zealand, even before COVID, we had been muddling along for some time. COVID then literally chucked the brakes on, and really we've hardly even been able to turn the key since to get the motor running again. So I think there is boldness required, but it's not just in a policy setting. It's actually getting real about the fact that if we really want to tackle the challenges facing New Zealand, it is going to be literally a team effort, business, the community and government. One of the things I think that's worrying business at the moment is that at the time it should be able to work more closely with government to get shit done. Government is sort of holding them at arm's length. So that would be, I think, the first thing for National ACT. The second thing is that National ACT, since ACT came to Parliament in '96, they have never really learnt to work together and recognise their respective roles, I guess, as a coalition government.
So I think
that's
siblings,
the big
aren't
work.
they? They're a bit as siblings, aren't they? They're kind of absolutely. Kirk, if you listened to Christian Hawkesby speak before, I sort of came away from that chat with Liam feeling that actually there's quite a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Grant Robertson said he was pretty optimistic about the future. Christian was sort of suggesting inflation, things easing significantly over the next 12 to 18 months. In a year's time, might we be having quite a different conversation now, do you think, as we're heading into an election?
Possibly. I mean, I think, one of the challenges is that you can't control, global production, which China's doing or not doing, which is driving inflation. I think there's probably going to be just to go back to kind of answer the question that you asked Trish. I think in terms of what National's opportunity and Labor's opportunities will be is to determine what they look like. For National, that will be saying something like, we represent small state. We represent getting out of the way so that you guys can get on with it. Labor's proposal is a different thing, and we saw that over COVID. We're the state. We can do a lot of the stuff where we see gaps. The question is, of course, around execution. So you've got two quite distinct strategies if you think about that from a political perspective going into the 23 election.
Okay. I'm going to get a final little statement from each of you. What is it going to come down to, do you think, in the next 12 months? I think you've just defined their delivery more so than aspiration, Kirk, but what's it going to come down to in this next year, do you think?
Having a really clear vision and a clarity of message and not being afraid of being repetitive about that message, about what you stand for.
Liam?
I'd like both major parties to be offering big visions and execution plans, but I'm a bit of a cynic. I think what it'll come down to is whether inflation is tracked down enough for people to feel less grumpy. If it has, it'll be a straight shooting match, a charm fight between Christopher Luxon and Jacinda Ardern. If we're still feeling as grumpy as we are now, I don't think I do think Labor will struggle.
Trish?
I think Liam's right. It's the grumpiness of the electorate that will decide the next election, and my pick would be that Labor, like most governments around the world who ran through the pandemic, will be a victim of it as well.
Okay, thank you all, Kirk, Liam and Trish. Thank you so much.